Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Why are we seeing it at this sort of state, these sort of numbers? What's going wrong?
So we live in a very violent society, and there are a number of studies that have shown that a very, very strong predictor of adult violence, including sexual violence, is whether that person experienced childhood trauma. And in South Africa, there are a number of studies that show that to us. There was, for instance, a study in 2009 by the Medical Research Council that looked at Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. And in that study, a third of men that they asked, have you raped a woman, said yes. In the past year, I've done so, and more than half of them had experienced bullying as a child. And more recently, in 2017, Wits University and Sonke Gender Justice did a study in Diepsloot in Johannesburg. And of the men that they interviewed, 56% of them said that either raped or beaten a woman, and 85% had experienced either physical or sexual abuse as a child or neglect.
So can I just jump in? I read that report, and amazing how many had done it multiple times.
Yes, most men, studies show us, rape more than once. And interestingly enough, most men start raping in their teenage years. They don't start at a later stage. And unless we address that trauma, we will always have children, boys who grow into violent adults. In the Diepsloot study, it, for instance, showed that a man who was abused as a child is 5 times more likely to abuse a woman and grow into an adult.
And this would be physical abuse, or?
It would be physical or sexual abuse. So it will be rape or it will be beating.
Why is it? I mean, you would think that you'd be, you know, repugnant, horrified by all the sort of things that had happened to them. Why does it lead to them often becoming the perpetrators?
Because that's what unresolved trauma does. So it would have been different if that trauma had been addressed. But if you have unresolved trauma, studies show us that your ability for empathy decreases. If you're a child, it influences your brain development. But more importantly, you try and use coping mechanisms that aren't good. And these are very often drugs and alcohol that also exacerbate your ability to be violent towards a woman. So if you are living in a society where there's very little mental health services available that you can afford, that is what happens. And you could imagine the intergenerational cycle. Because imagine a boy growing up in a house, or a girl being abused, growing into a violent adult, and would then be exposing their children to that. And
so very quickly the numbers grow, don't they?
Absolutely. And in South Africa, a UCT study has shown us that by the time that a South African child reaches the age of 17, 1 out of 3 have been sexually abused.
Now, I mean, Cyril Ramaphosa finally spoke out. We need this sort of leadership. We need people to be disgusted by this. Is that enough? What could that potentially lead to?
Well, it's very courageous that he spoke out, but I was disappointed by a few things in his speech. I was disappointed that he didn't tell us where the money was going to come from and what he's going to do with that. To give you an example, we've got Thuthuzela care centres in the country that are supposed to provide people who have been abused women with help. Half of them don't have counsellors. So the mental consequences of the trauma is not being addressed. The President announced in his SONA speech and at the GBV summit last year that he would look into money for them. We at Bekasisa did a story when we called the President's office and said, why is there no money still? The answer was, well, the President expects departments to follow through when he announces that there would be money. When we called the Social Development Department, we called for 2 months, literally weekly. We didn't get any response. So it's good to announce, but what will happen? The other thing that concerns me is that if, for instance, said there will be harsher punishment. The Medical Research Council did a study about 2 years ago. Only 8.6% of rape cases that are reported to the police end up in a conviction. So you can have all the harsher punishments you like. If there's no one to convict, it doesn't really help. But most importantly, he said, rape is not a woman's problem, it's a men's problem. But it is a societal problem. And I feel he didn't address the causes of rape. You know, the 2 things that most commonly come up is childhood trauma and sexual entitlement. Men who think it's their right to rape or it's their right to demand sex from a woman.
Mia Malan, thank you for coming in. We're going to keep talking about this until we see fundamental changes. Thank you.